opening frame at the boundary.
In this episode, we look at photographs taken in the Łódź Ghetto during the German occupation. In 1940, German authorities forced Jews into a sealed part of the city and turned it into one of the largest ghettos in occupied Europe. What we see here is not ordinary life in any simple sense. These images show daily routines under confinement: streets, stalls, workshops, food, labor, and passing faces inside a world cut off from the rest of the city. We will look at them one by one.
Frame 1. Street as entry.
After the sign and the barrier, we enter the street. What strikes the eye first is space. A wide, cobbled road, tram tracks in the ground, and wires overhead. The foreground is almost empty. The people are gathered further away, mostly along the right side of the street and deeper in the frame. That contrast is important. The street seems open, but the life inside it is pushed toward the edges, toward the sidewalk, the doorway, the place of waiting. On the right, the wooden house appears older and more fragile than the larger buildings further on. Nothing dramatic happens here, and that is precisely why the photograph works as an entry point. It shows a street that still belongs to the city, but already exists inside a sealed world.
Frame 2. The city still holds its shape.
The second image broadens the view. Here, the ghetto does not look separate from the city. It still holds the shape of the city itself. The street stretches into the distance, lined with tall tenement houses and regular facades. Horse-drawn carts stand in the road, while a few people move between the pavement and the street. Nothing in the structure of the scene seems temporary. The buildings are solid. The street is clearly organized. The perspective remains calm and legible. That is important. This photograph shows that the ghetto was not placed outside urban life. It was cut into the city and sealed within it. The city still holds its shape, even as its freedom has been taken away.
Frame 3. At the sidewalk.
The third image moves us closer to the sidewalk. The wide view of the city gives way to a facade, a pavement, and a line of people gathered along the building. Some stand in the doorways, some sit close to the wall, others pause in small groups or pass by without stopping. The street is still present, but it is no longer the center of the image. What matters now is the edge of the street, the place where movement slows into waiting, sitting, watching, and perhaps small exchange. The building itself is striking. Its facade is decorative, and the domed roof still carries the weight of an older urban world. Below it, the human activity seems more reduced and more immediate. This is no longer just a view of the city. It is a place where daily life gathers along the edge.
Frame 4. At the market square.
The fourth image opens onto a square. The street gives way to a market space, and the people are spread more widely across the frame. Some walk across the open ground, some pause, some seem to carry goods or move between makeshift stalls. In the background stands what is likely the Church of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, an old landmark in this part of Łódź. That detail helps place the photograph inside the city's older geography. The setting is not outside the city, it is part of it. This looks like a market square still used for movement and exchange, even within a world already sealed and constrained.
Frame 5. In the passage.
The fifth image takes us into a narrower world. The open square is gone. In its place, we find a passage, compressed between rough walls and wooden surfaces. An older man stands almost at the center of the frame, still and watchful, while small goods appear on either side of him. Shoes hanging to the left, jars and bottles set out on a makeshift table to the right. This is not a broad market scene. It is exchange reduced to a very small scale. The space itself seems provisional, almost improvised, as if daily life has been pushed into the gaps between larger structures. That may be one of the important things this photograph shows. In the ghetto, routine did not disappear, but it often survived in compressed form, in narrow passages, in fragile arrangements, in the circulation of a few necessary objects. The image does not dramatize that condition. It simply records how little space ordinary activity sometimes had left.
Frame 6. The Mending Shop.
The sixth image looks, at first, almost ordinary. People pass along the pavement, a man stands in the doorway. The scene carries the rhythm of errands and small daily routines. But the sign behind them changes the meaning of the image. It reads Chironia, a mending shop. That matters. This is not a place for new clothing. It is a place where worn things are repaired and made usable again. In any city, such a shop might seem unremarkable, but here, in the ghetto, the word carries extra weight. It points to a material world in which fabric had to last, damage had to be managed, and old things had to keep serving. At the same time, the stars on the clothing change the whole scene. They are not neutral symbols. They are marks imposed by the occupiers, compulsory signs that identify Jewish inhabitants and set them apart from the rest of the city. The people move through familiar gestures of daily life, but they do so while visibly marked by coercion. The photograph holds those realities together, routine on the surface and pressure written into both the body and the things that body depends on.
Frame 7. A Shop by Chalk.
The seventh image shows a shop reduced to its simplest form. There is no polished storefront, no formal signboard, and no clear border between the street and the interior. The open doors themselves become the front of the shop, and the threshold becomes part of the space of exchange. Goods are placed on the step and just inside the entrance. The markings on the doors appear to be written by hand, perhaps in chalk. The number 66 is clear, while much of the rest is harder to read with certainty. That detail is revealing. The whole place feels temporary, improvised, almost assembled out of immediate need. The street around it is nearly empty, which gives the image an unusual stillness. And then there is the boy at the left edge of the frame, looking toward the camera. He is not the center of the composition, but his glance reminds us that this is also a moment of encounter. The photograph records not only a shop, but a fragile form of life gathered at its door.
Frame 8. The Barber's Doorway.
The eighth image shows a more established kind of service. The sign is clearer, the price list is more formal, and the doorway belongs not to a makeshift stall, but to a barber's shop. The word Friseur appears on the sign, suggesting a German language inscription. That detail matters. German had long been present in Łódź, but under occupation, it also carried the force of public authority. We do not need to know exactly for whom this sign was meant to see that language itself is part of the story here. Beside the doorway hangs a list of services and prices. Not every line can be read with certainty, but the overall meaning is clear. This is a place where cutting, grooming, and bodily upkeep are offered as services. The man standing in the doorway gives the image its center. He stands with his cap in his hand between the street and the interior. The photograph does not tell us why, yet even such a small gesture reminds us that bodily bearing, posture, and appearance were never entirely neutral in an occupied world. The photograph shows that life in the ghetto involved not only exchange and repair, but also the upkeep of the body and the social forms around it.
Frame 9. Goods in the Open.
The ninth image brings us back to exchange, but in a more exposed and improvised form. Goods are spread out close to the ground, in baskets, on low stands, and in small, scattered groupings. This does not look like a formal market with stable stalls. It looks more like a loose economy of everyday objects. Pots, containers, and watering cans are visible among the goods. The watering cans are especially interesting. They may point toward daily work around water, plants, or small cultivation, activities that could become especially important under conditions of scarcity. The people in the frame do not all seem to occupy the same position. Some appear engaged in exchange, while others seem simply to stand and observe. The man at the right is striking for that reason. The photograph does not allow a secure identification, but his posture and separation from the marked figures around him introduce a quiet sense of supervision into the scene. In the foreground, the star on the woman's back is especially visible, and other signs of marking can be noticed elsewhere in the frame as well. The image shows not only exchange, but exposure. Objects in the open, bodies in the open, and daily life unfolding under unequal conditions of visibility and control.
Frame 10. Serving at the market.
The 10th image brings us closer to food itself. At the center of the frame, a woman leans over a large pot, holding a plate of small round items and lowering one of them into the vessel below. We cannot be sure whether they are potatoes, eggs, or something else, but the gesture is clear. She is sorting, serving, or preparing food. That changes the scene. Earlier photographs showed goods laid out in the market. Here we see food being handled directly, by hand, in the middle of the square. The market becomes more intimate and more immediate. Beside her sits another woman, turned toward the camera. Her expression is especially striking. It seems unexpectedly open, almost like the beginning of a smile. That does not cancel the hardship of the scene, but it does remind us that even under pressure, the camera could still catch a moment of human response. This photograph shows not only scarcity, but the labor of making food usable, of turning what is available into something that can be eaten, shared, or passed on.
Frame 11. Sorting sols.
The 11th image shifts the film into a different kind of labor. We are no longer in the market or at the doorway of a shop. Here, the frame is dominated by huge piles of similar objects, while men bend down, lift them, sort them, and move them by hand. At first glance, the heaps may call up later and more terrible associations. But this is exactly where we have to be careful. These do not look like mixed, worn shoes. They appear much more uniform, light in color, similar in shape, and piled up like components rather than personal belongings. The most likely reading is that these are wooden soles, clog bases, or unfinished parts of footwear. In the material world of the Łódź Ghetto, that possibility matters. We know that wooden footwear and other improvised forms of use belonged to everyday life under conditions of shortage and compulsion. That changes the meaning of the image. What we see here is not a memorial trace, but a work process. Material handled in bulk, bodies organized around repetition, and labor shaped by quantity rather than individuality. The photograph adds something new to the story of the ghetto. It shows not only trade, repair, and food, but also a form of production, or at least sorting and handling, large enough to feel almost industrial.
Frame 12. An older house.
The 12th image slows the film down again. After the labor and repetition of the previous frame, we arrive at a space marked by quiet and exposure. At the center stands a low wooden house, older in form and scale than the large masonry buildings behind it. The contrast is striking. The small house seems fragile beside the heavy apartment blocks, yet it clearly belongs here. It is part of an older layer of the city. That matters. The ghetto did not contain one single kind of urban space. It enclosed different times of the city at once. Wooden houses, newer blocks, open ground, and suddenly visible edges. The children in the foreground make the image more poignant. They are small within the frame, and the emptiness around them feels unusually wide. This is not a scene of exchange or labor. It is a scene of habitation, and of how exposed habitation could become.
Frame 13. A line of order.
The 13th image brings a different kind of order into view. These men are not gathered like shoppers, workers, or passers-by. They stand in a long, disciplined line across the open ground. The image is built on formation, alignment, and control. These men belong to the Jewish Order Service in the Łódź Ghetto, the ghetto police. That position was deeply difficult and historically compromised. The Jewish Order Service stood between German authority and the Jewish population of the ghetto and became part of the machinery of internal control. Later, that role would also become bound up with coercion and deportation. But this photograph shows none of that directly. What it shows is the visual structure of discipline: bodies arranged into a line, individuality reduced, and order made visible. After the earlier images of trade, repair, food, and habitation, this one reminds us that life in the ghetto was shaped not only by scarcity, but also by hierarchy and control.
Frame 14. At the fence.
The 14th image brings us back toward the boundary. Two men stand in the foreground, both looking toward something outside the frame. Behind them we see a fence or gate, and above it a line of barbed wire. Beyond that barrier, other buildings and at least one distant figure remain visible. The fence does not fully close the eye. It leaves the other side partially in view. The photograph does not tell us exactly what the men are looking at, but it places them very close to the edge of enclosure. That is important. Earlier in the film, the boundary appeared as a sign and a prohibition. Here, it appears as part of ordinary sight: a fence nearby, a barrier always present, a limit built into the everyday view. One of the men wears the imposed star on his jacket. Both stand still, but their attention reaches beyond the frame. The image does not turn the border into spectacle. It simply shows how near it was, how closely daily life could exist beside the fact of confinement.
Closing frame. Back at the boundary.
We end where the film began. At first, this image served simply as a threshold. It marked the world we were about to enter. But after moving through the streets, shops, markets, workshops, and fences of the ghetto, it returns with a different force. Only now does its point of view become fully clear. For the first and only time, the camera stands outside the enclosed world it has been showing us from within. The German guard at the gate makes that outer position unmistakable. The barrier is no longer only a sign of prohibition. It becomes a structure of vision, a line across which the inside was watched, held, and closed off. After so many images of daily life under confinement, this final return reminds us that the world we have been seeing was not only enclosed from within, but sealed from outside. The boundary was not only around daily life, it defined it.
If this small fragment of the past spoke to you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.